As a teacher, do you ever feel like it takes several minutes during a class period, too many minutes, to get students focused on the skill you want them to acquire? Wouldn't it be great if students were able to determine what would be on a test before a study guide was passed out? Wouldn't it be nice if they could automatically deduce the basic components of a writing assignment without one being posted? Well, these are just a few perks to designing daily learning targets to guide classroom learning. I know what you're thinking. Learning targets? These aren't anything new. It's just a newer buzz term for some repackaged former educational concept. My opinion is that you're partly right. And posting a learning target? That's just writing the objective on a board to prove to administrators you're standards focused. Not really. Writers Ron Berger, Leah Rugen, and Libby Woodfin call their learning target-oriented classroom environment expeditionary learning. They propose something most teachers agree with, that learning should be an expedition. Helen Keller once said, "Life is either a great adventure or nothing." Since you're watching this to find out just a little more about learning targets, I'm going to keep a narrow focus on this component of expeditionary learning. To learn more, read Berger's book, Leaders of Their Own Learning, published by John Wiley & Sons. Learning targets are the foundation of a student-gauged assessment system. They translate state and Common Core standards into learning goals for lessons, projects, units, and courses, and are written in student-friendly language that is concrete and understandable. Student-friendly language includes familiar terminology, as well as easy-to-follow sentence construction, and probably most unique to the concept, the use of "I can" to lead the sentence off. Berger and others suggest that changing the phrasing from "the student will be able to" "I can" allows students to be more likely to adapt the skill language for themselves and, in theory, show greater willingness to achieve it. I think many teachers understand the inefficacy of putting complex, carefully crafted, sometimes paragraph-length standards as a day's focus on the board. For example, consider the following standards. In 10th grade, Writing Standard 10.1 states, write arguments to support claims in an analysis of substantive topics or texts, using valid reasoning and relevant and sufficient evidence. And it has subpoints, A, B, C, D, and E. A, introduce precise claims, distinguish the claims from alternate or opposing claims, and create an organization that establishes clear relationships among claims, counterclaims, reasons, and evidence. Part B, develop claims and counterclaims fairly, supplying evidence for each while pointing out the strengths and limitations of both in a manner that anticipates the audience's knowledge level and concerns. Part C, use words, phrases, and clauses to link the major sections of the text, create cohesion, and clarify the relationships between claims and reasons, between reasons and evidence, and between claims and counterclaims. Letter D, establish and maintain a formal style and an objective tone while attending to the norms and conventions of the discipline in which they are writing. And E, provide a concluding statement or section that follows from and supports the argument presented. One would notice that Writing Standard 10.4 is equally complex when viewed by itself. Produce clear and coherent writing in which the development, organization, and style are appropriate to task, purpose, and audience. And then also Writing Standard 10.5. Develop and strengthen writing as needed by planning, revising, editing, rewriting, or trying a new approach, focusing on addressing what is most significant for a specific purpose and audience. And finally, the Reading Informational Text Standard 10.1. Cite strong and thorough textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. But a learning target is an unpacked, simpler approach to building up to mastering a standard. Standards aren't mastered in a day, but a learning target can be. In an argument and persuasion unit using a variety of nonfiction texts, my English 10 class built up to an assessment of a 3-page in-class argumentative essay, which is a grade-level writing goal for one sitting. In order to get there, we had to concentrate on numerous daily learning targets. Consider how the targets we used built up to the ultimate goal. 1. I can differentiate the three rhetorical appeals used to persuade: logos, ethos, and pathos. I can define and provide an example of the following logical fallacies: circular reasoning, false cause and effect, hasty generalization, either-or fallacy, and name-calling fallacy. A third learning target I had was I can distinguish factual evidence from an author's opinion. I can identify the three main parts of an argument: claim, evidence, proof, reasoning. Another, I can identify a hook, or an attention grabber, and a call to action and employ them in my writing. I can research my topic and successfully find relevant information that supports reasons for my claim and refutations for the counter-argument. I can choose appropriate language for searching my topic. I can search for and select a persuasive essay topic that interests me. I can create a claim that is arguable, specific, interesting, and relevant to an audience. I can identify at least three reasons that support my claim and one counterpoint others use to reject my claim. I can describe what is considered a reliable source of online information. I can accurately cite sources using MLA format in text and on a works cited page. I can write an argument addressing all basic components and using appropriate transitional and introductory language, including a hook. I can use transitional words and phrases to signal introductions of new reasons or evidence. I can analyze another's writing and identify ways to improve grammar, punctuation, syntax, diction, format, and citation. And finally, I can revise my own writing based on another's suggestions and my own proofreading. So, to write a learning target. First, choose a standards-based lesson with which to get started. Make sure to choose a lesson that meets required standards that can be taught and assessed in one time frame. Start small, make it manageable, accessible, and student-friendly. There's an example given in Ron Berger's book on pages 24 through 26 that I think is valuable. He gives an example of Writing Standard 2.1 of the Common Core. Write opinion pieces in which they introduce the topic or book they are writing about. State an opinion, supply reasons that support the opinion, use linking words such as because, and, also, to connect opinion and reasons, and provide a concluding statement or section. He says it would be more reasonable for a person to choose one manageable and accessible component of this standard to create a learning target. For example, the teacher may decide that the most important place to start is for students to learn to form an opinion of a story they have read, supported by evidence. So the teacher could choose, I can develop an opinion about my story. The teacher could also use, I can craft one sentence that describes my opinion of my story. And then that would be followed by, I can support my opinion with one example from my story. It's good to choose something students are able to assess themselves as they progress during and at the conclusion of a lesson. If the target for a 9th grade English class is, I can write a haiku poem that creates a vivid picture, and no time is provided for students to assess whether the pictures are vivid, then student-engaged assessment is lost. The teacher should also avoid focusing on the task and not the learning. For example, it should not be, I can make a poster about the ideal habitat for the bear, but instead, I can describe the ideal habitat for the bear. Finally, our goal is that students become leaders of their own learning. It is to get students to begin constructing and guiding their own learning processes. There's much talk about teachers facilitating. This doesn't always happen with the use of standards or objectives, but I'm certainly not saying it's impossible. Using learning targets just seems to make the process easier for the teacher and the student to focus. In my classroom, for example, once I adopted learning targets each day, I would have the students read 1 or 2 targets for that class period, but I soon noticed that students were not remembering the actual target. It seemed like nothing had changed. If I was going to begin teaching using these targets, having students write with them in mind, then producing study guides and tests centered on them, I needed students to have become familiar with them. So I developed a sheet that gives students the responsibility of writing down the targets every day. They keep the sheet in a binder. They are responsible for checking a box that indicates that they believe they have mastered respective targets. and every so often I check the sheets. When students leave targets unchecked, I discuss those skills with the students and I remediate independently or collectively based on need. This learning target checklist has greatly improved the process. The authors of Leaders of Their Own Learning provide much more material that logically follows the aims of learning targets, mostly hinging on the component of student engagement and student assessment. I know that I need to grow in these areas. It's difficult for any teacher to give up control of a class and encourage students to be more independent in their learning. For some, adopting learning targets might not be that much of a change, and people are entitled to the opinion that there's nothing different about them and objectives. If you are interested in a much more organized method of teaching, though, and if you think your students would benefit by being more involved in keeping track of the skills they've learned, then look into learning targets. Slowly but surely, my students are starting to have an awareness of how essays will be graded, that is, how the rubric will appear, and what will be on tests. And they're starting to see on their own if they need help. That makes it worth it to me.